hope everybody's been enjoying what they've seen so far today. We've taken a look at some of the basics of USD, as well as taking some assets and preparing your assets to get the most out of USD and have them come into Solaris in a very easy, and a manner that makes sense. So now what I would like to do is I am going to take some assets and build up a scene, do some layout. And this here's just a quick look at sort of what I'm shooting for. And so now let's dive in and get started. So I'm going to drop down a stage manager node. And let's take a look at that. So see here that the pane is a little different than what you might be used to. We even have a file browser here. I can go into any one of these folders and dive inside. I'm looking for assets only, so I can say set as root. So now I'm looking just at my assets folder, and I can start populating my scene graph. So let me go in here. Let's go down. Let's grab the table. Let's bring that over. Let's open that up. Now take note as I'm dropping these items over that my scene graph tree down here is basically looks exactly the same as what you see up here for the most part as far as the structure goes for each one of these assets. So I'll bring over a table asset. I bring over a book asset like this. Now before I go too far, what I want to do is I want to do some organization. So I'm going to create a new child there. We're going to call it shop front. And then under that, we'll put table as a child, we'll put books as a child, drag the books in there, drag the table into its assets. Can even add one, we'll call it barrels. And let me grab a barrel, bring that over. Maybe I'll grab one and I'll grab basket. Let's bring that over. Now bringing over these things are called assets. So like you'll notice for the books in a minute, I'm just going to copy the same asset a few times. So now that I've done that, before I get started moving things around, let me point out a couple of things. So you'll see here, we have some of the information here in this panel. We have the reference file that's being referenced by each one of these because everything is a reference in a stage manager node. We can control the variants in the reference primitive. We can also control whether it's being loaded as a payload or not. And we also have a transform jack. So I can actually click on transform jack here to grab this barrel and move it around, move it over here. I can do the same for the basket. Let's move it over here. And I can also, from this, I can also control the variant. So let's say I want to say large basket with carpets. I can control that. And let's start placing my books too. I'll do that from the viewport. So hit S, select the book. All staying within the stage manager. So you want to make sure that you're in that stage manager state as you do some of these things. Keep grabbing some stuff here, bringing them up. Now these books, of course, are all the same because I haven't changed any of the variants yet. So let's go in and do that now. Start on the bottom one here. So as long as I'm in, I want to keep in the stage manager node. I don't want to change the variant and then have it add an edit variant node, which it would do. Like for example, if I did that down here, if I right clicked on the variant in the variant column and went over here and said book 4, it's going to add a set variant node. But for what I'm doing right now is I want to stay inside of the stage manager node. So if you make sure that your viewport, it says you're in stage manager, and then if I right click, and I could say edit variant, and then I can go in and change. I don't want that one there. Let's change this to book 5. And let's change this one to 2. Sure. Change this one to 4. Let's change this one here. 3. And yeah, that looks fine. I think that'll work for what we're doing here. I want to go in also too and actually just kind of spin some things around a tiny bit. Move them around a little, just as a starting point to my layout. Okay, so obviously I could grab each one of these like I'm doing already and start placing them onto the table, but I am going to use our edit LOP, which has a great feature called that you can use physics to place all these objects. So I am going to go into select mode and select all of the books. I'm going to hit tab to bring up and drop down an edit LOP. And so now you see I have a checkbox here that could say use physics. And so now when I bring everything down, it uses physics to place those books. So let me just drag it in, bringing them over a little bit. Oops. I can even go in and select just one of them, maybe pull that over to the side like that. Let's place it there. And just kind of move it against these books like that. Okay, it's not perfect, but it'll do for right now. Let's bring it down a little bit more. Whoops. Make sure you always got to make sure you're in that edit LOP. There we go. Okay. So now I want to add in some more objects. So let me bring in a broom. Let's bring in a broom. Broom asset. We don't have a group for that, so let's add one. Brooms. Bring that up in there, just like that. So actually now, instead of adding more brooms there, I'm going to leave my trusty node. Let's place him there. I'm going to leave the stage manager node, and I'm going to drop down a duplicate here in between it. And I'm going to make sure I'm pointing just at that broom asset. So so now I'm getting some duplicates there. So I started with the stage manager, I referenced it and everything, but now I'm going to build on top of that. And I'm going to duplicate these. So let's make 4 copies of the broom and then just kind of move them out this way. Maybe 6 copies of the broom. There we go. And I put it in between the edit because I'm going to use the edit LOP for these as well. In fact, if I just go over to my edit LOP. Now I want to make sure I select the brooms and hit enter and scale them and squeeze them all together just like that. Cool. And then now I'm just going to bring them over and drop them into my barrel. There we go. Get some nice placement in there. Cool. So that's it. So the edit LOP and the stage manager, it's a great way to kind of do some layout when you're working at that base level and doing your sort of base layout. Some things that are very important to consider are that, so if I go into my edit LOP and I hit, let's go into edit state, and I say display proxies, you'll notice that a lot of these objects are showing that there's a proxy there. So that's a simulation proxy. And so that's important because if you have high-res geometry and you're trying to do all of this, you're doing some, cool stuff here where you're trying to use the edit LOP and you have lots of objects in there, it's going to slow you down. So what you can do is we do have a node that is called a sim proxy node. And I'll just show you how that works really quickly on one object, but we won't do too much with it. If I just had, say, let's try, I don't know, baskets. Large basket with handles. So let's look at that. There's my large, I didn't bring in the assets, so the materials aren't there. So if I had a simulation proxy here, let's make sure I'm pointing at the right thing. And I say convex hull. And so now if I display that proxy, it created a proxy for me. And if I look in my scene graph, it's now part of that. So if I wanted to then include that, then now I have proxy geometry as part of this asset. And I can do it in line here. I would be able to, in fact, we can just squeeze this in here just like that. And so now if I was to then select this with my edit LOP and move it around, it's using that proxy geometry. So if I say display proxies, I get to see it. So something to keep in mind while you're building your assets. It's definitely a very super handy thing to have. And yeah, so keep that in mind. So I'm not going to sit here and build the entire layout for you or let you watch me build that entire layout. So let's start over here and let's assume somebody built this tent layout for us. So let's go ahead and we're going to reference in our scene. So I am going to, let's go up here, back to our layout. Let's grab this full scene. And let's drop it in here. So you see, it's got everything. It's got the cyclorama. Now, there's a number of things I could do. I could reference in each one of these things, or each portion, like shop back and shop front individually. Or I could do it this way, where I just bring in the whole scene. I want to put it at scene, or I could just leave this at the default and say it here and just have it pull from the name. So now it's putting it where I want. But I don't want cyclorama. So let's say I can prune that and it won't be displayed. But this is really just a display thing, right? So if I grab cyclorama and bring it up here, then I won't see the cyclorama, but it's still being imported. So another alternative that I could do is in my scene, I could choose the primitives that I want. So I could say scene, shop front, apply, scene 2, and then say shop back, right? And then let's just make sure that these are going to the right spot. This would be scene, shop front. In fact, we can even say parameter based relative reference. We have scene, shop back. So now I'm referencing in just those things, so I don't have to worry about the cyclorama for now. But since I got rid of that, I want to build my own ground plane. So let's just call this scene. We can call this actually, let's organize this a little bit better. Shop front, shop back, and then here, let's say reverts to defaults, and then just put the scene in front of it. Same here. Okay, that's better. I like that. Okay. And to make sure I have these all, okay, everything's organized nicely. Okay. So I just turned these into assembly. So each one is sort of an assembly, which is a collection of all the groups, which are all the groups of all the assets and components underneath them. So now that I've done that, what I want to do is build a ground plane, like I said, sorry. So let me drop down a grid. So that's just like if I had done that inside of object space and drop down a geometry container. But what we're dropped down here is called a sock create node. And I'm just going to call it ground plane. And I can dive inside, and there's a grid. And I'm just going to make this grid bigger, something like that. I'll put some texture on it too. So UV texture node. Ooh, there we go. And let's just scale this up a little bit for now. Okay, so I have my thing here. I'm going to turn off some of these display things in the viewport. Just say selection only. Okay, that's better. Less stuff going on here. So now that I have my ground plane, I want to add, so there's a couple things I just want to point out on the subcreate node. Again, this import path prefix. So let's look at what this did to our scene graph. So we got our ground plane, which is great. That's what we wanted, but it put it at the root level. I don't want to do that. I want to put it, let's say we put it at scene. Maybe we'll make something called ENV and then ground plane. So now I have something there called ground plane. Now it changed the scene level to component, which I didn't want to do. So if I go down to my SOP import node or SOP import tab, and I say primitive definition, there's a slot here for kind authoring. So if I select that, right now it defaults to all geometry as one component, which is why it changed that into a component, because I'm putting it in this primitive path, change that to a component. So what I want to do is actually say nested assemblies and groups and components. Or I could also say nested groups and components, but we'll say assembly and groups so that the scene remains an assembly. And a lot of this stuff is for organizational purposes. In fact, I think you can, even customize those. So I have that done. I have my ground plane where I want it to be. I also want to make sure that I set as layer save path because I want this ground plane to be written as an asset somewhere. So what I'm going to do for that is in assets here, I'm just going to say ground plane .usd. Okay. And you'll see we'll get some errors about that later, maybe on some other things, but because we'll give some warnings that there should always be, your layer should be going somewhere. So now that I have my layer save path set, I want to add a material to this. So let's drop down a material library. And so with the material library, so when I dive inside of it, it's an empty library. And you'll see I'm just in VOPs. I can just build up my materials just like I would in the material context. So with that, I'm going to drop down a principled shader. We call it dirt. Let's bring up the base color to this because I'm going to add some texture. So let's grab the texture from here. This might take a second. Let's grab the low res version here. I'm just going to copy it because I'm going to put it into displacement. And we're good to go. So I've built my material and it's connected to my scene graph tree here, but it's not even showing up in my scene graph yet. So what I have to do is I click on autofill materials. And once I do that, it populates this parameter window and our scene graph with the materials that are inside. In this case, there's only one, so it only added one. And you see I can set the material path and I can assign it to the geometry. So let me grab my ground plane and bring it over here. Now it's assigned to the geometry. I can go back inside. So let me pop up. Let's pin this for a second as I go inside and just kind of scale this a little bit more, something like that. I don't want to get too repetitive there, but that's fine for this. Now, this is always working fine. It's basically doing what I want. But the thing is, what's different here is that I want materials to be part of the ground plane. So in this material path, I want to put that same path in here, which is scene / env / ground plane. And so now the materials and the ground plane are all one. And so what's great about that is now I'm going to do configure layer. And what this will do is this is going to write this out And we'll look at this when this is all finished, and we'll take a quick look at all of these things. But I'm gonna build this, or I'm gonna write this out as sort of the new market layout. So if I go in, I'm going to say market layer, I should say. We can call this magic market asset. So I'm going to say USDA so that we can see what's inside. So now that I've done that, I want to start a new layer. And what that will do is, so what's going to happen here, just a quick explanation, and then we'll look at it later once I write these layers out, is this is going to take everything that you see above. It's going to have the references to these two things, plus all of the geometry information in that Magic Market USD asset. And so, yeah, so now I am going to start to add some more things to my layer here. I'm going to drop down a Stage Manager node. And I want to bring in these buildings that I have. So we have these great buildings that we got from Kitbash 3D. They just make some amazing kits that you can use. This is from the Dark Fantasy kit. I brought in everything as an FBX. And you'll see, just take a note here too, how they're organized when we use our FBX importer. And what's really kind of nice about that is when I bring that in Solaris, a lot of the organization of the scene graph tree is done for me. So if you see here, you see that we have building group A, building group B. I'm only bringing in these two buildings. I put them at 0, or at the origin rather, and then write those out. So I'm going to use these awesome buildings for our scene here. But again, they have some just great stuff. They have lots of really cool kits in there. So I encourage you to check them out. Yeah, so there we go. So let's grab our buildings here and let's bring them into our scene. So let's go back up. Let's go to assets. Nope. I went too far. Dark Fantasy, that's the kit that I use, I think I mentioned. And let's grab building A and building B. They also have this really cool carriage asset that I'm going to use as well. Let's grab that and bring that over. Okay, so let's close our Stage Manager up for now. And as always, I want to do a little bit of organization here. So let's just take a quick look at what we got. So we got scene, ENV. So we're going to put this in with the environments. So let's, here we'll say, let's put this in scene, right? And then we'll say ENV, and then we'll say buildings. And then I'm also going to add carriage and grab both of these, bring them down. And so now when I sublayer these things in here, gotta make sure I say sublayer inputs. See, my carriage and my buildings go right into ENV, right where I expect them. Now, I mentioned that we might sometimes get these little warnings. It's because I haven't set any sort of layer save path for that Stage Manager yet. So we might as well do that now so I can configure this layer. Drop this down inside here. And let's give us a save path. And this save path, we can say, we'll call this, let's see, we'll call this the ENV layer, I suppose. And should be good to go. Okay, so let's look at what we got here. Well, my carriage is way out here, so why don't I just bring that closer as a starting point anyway. Okay, and let's just generally, I know we want to look this way, so I'm just going to make some big moves here with these buildings. Let's bring them over here, Same with this guy. Let's just move him back. Probably going to have to come over, so let's do this. Okay. I was kind of looking at something a little bit like that. So I'm going to go back into my stage manager here. Let's spin this guy around. Let's get him, this guy, move him over, move him back and over. And then put this one for a little bit more. Actually, not so bad. And back. Looks like they're kind of on a block there. Okay. Carriage I'm going to leave there for right now because what I want to do is next I'm going to place some big rocks right around here, and I'll do it with the stage manager again. I can go in here, say rocks, grab this rock asset, and just call this rocks. Grab this, bring it in the ENV, bring the rocks asset in there. And let's just hit Control D a couple times to make a few copies. And then we're going to place these around our little scene here. Let's just spin it around. Move it towards the back. Oh, maybe not down that low. That would look a little strange. Okay, like that. Same here. Click here. Still in the stage manager. Let's change this to a different rock. Yeah, that's good. Spin it around. We have it like we're right up against that rock. And we'll add one more here. I'm going to move this guy back here. Let's change him to 4. Yeah, let's just make him smaller. But it's kind of cool. Didn't work. It'll work for this. I can put the cart in. So maybe what I'll do now, as I'm doing here, and take the cart, carriage, and this guy, we're going to move right into place. Now there's no proxy geometry for these, so I'm not going to use the physically based stuff at this time. So we'll just kind of do this by eye, which is fine. Okay, cool. So that layout's not so bad. It's at least something that we can get started with. So let's place that a little bit more. Okay, so now that I've done that and I have this nice little, what we're calling our environment layer, I want to start doing some more little set dressing things to kind of add some more variation and just little subtleties. So we're on a dirt road, so why don't we add some pebbles to this operation? So let me drop down a reference node here. We're going to call this pebbles 1. And I'm going to just grab one of those rock assets. Let's grab it. Where is it? Rocks here. And I'm going to, actually, before I do that, now this, I'm going to try and set the variant from here. Let's do rock 5. Not sure what just happened there, why that went away. That's strange. I'm going to drop down a reference node again. Something a little weird happened. Drop down pebbles. I must have accidentally clicked something. Rock acid. Okay, there we go. Now I'm going to do, I want to set the variant. So I'm going to drop down a set variant node here. And now, like I said, this is looking at whatever input prim there is there. Actually, let's change it to Pebble 1, not Pebbles. And let's make sure that we're doing that and that. And let's say I want the model and I want rock 5. There's a viewport override. I think I accidentally clicked on something. So if you ever have things hidden and you see little red dots and they don't go away no matter what you are selecting, you can clear all your viewport overrides. It's a handy little thing to know, be aware of. So I set that variant to rock 5, and then I'm just going to click and drag, alt click and drag both of those, though I do need to change this. And then I'm going to change this to be rock 2. And I also want to modify that a little bit. I don't want it to be standing on its head like that. So let me just rotate it. There we go. Good enough. All right. So these are what I'm going to use for pebbles. I know that's those big rocks, but we'll just shrink them down and see what we get out of them. So now that I've done that, I'm going to drop down an instance to points node. Actually, it's an instancer, but it's set up when you say instant to points with a few different assumptions. So the first of it being is it's saying the prototype source is the second input. And so what a prototype is it's basically the objects or the assets that are getting instanced onto the points and put into your scene graph. So I'm using the second input. So I just have these stacked just like this. And instead of saying just used entire stage, I'm going to point to Pebble 1. And so let me just let's close up some of these for now. And let me just solo the point instancer. So there's a little solo tab. So now as I randomly scroll through, let's change it to a star. You'll see that I'm getting a bunch of different, I'm just randomly going through the rocks. In fact, why don't we just take this and let's add another pebble into the mix here. This will be 3. Let's just make sure we're pointing at 3. And let's choose, I don't know, what does that look like? Rock number 4. Double 3, rock 4. Let's bring this in here because I was still looking at that. And let's go here, and now it's going through all of the different rocks that we have. Awesome. So I'm going to use these for my pebbles. So now I'm going to dive inside. There's just an add sop in there. Again, that's one of sort of the assumptions we make with that node, but let me delete that. Because now what I want to do is, actually before I do that, if you remember, I had soloed everything. So let me clear all the viewport overrides again. Now what I want to do is I want to grab my ground plane geometry. So let's do a LOP import. I'm going to go grab that path, the LOP path. And I want to make sure I'm choosing that primitive. In this case, it probably isn't that big of a deal if I didn't do it that way. So now I have brought in the geometry. I brought in my ground plane. And then what I'm going to do in this ground plane is I'm going to paint on top of it. So let's drop down a spray paint node. And so let's spray paint here. And so let's unpin that so that I'm actually looking at the context inside. And so now I can start spray painting. So let me zoom out a little bit. We see all of our buildings here. We see some of our rocks. We'll start there maybe. Let's bring this down to 3. And I could just start spray painting. I'll turn off lights for now. Just start spray painting my rocks, some pebbles on the ground here, right around maybe in front of the cart a little, in front of some of these other things. I'm just painting. So if you zoom in here, you'll see that I have some spheres. I can turn off the spheres and just actually look at the rocks that are being added to the scene. So can just put them anywhere. Go over here, put some scattered around some of these buildings. Same with here and here. Whoa. There we go. Sorry about that. My mouse wheel's getting out of me. Yeah, so there we go. So that's pretty good. I don't love the scale. It's probably a little bit too big for some of these. So let me, now these bounding boxes, just as a reminder, we have some optimization tools. If I turn those off, I'll see everything, but it's just to kind of keep the viewport running smoothly. Let me turn down my minimum radius to like 0.03, and then max, let's make it 0.07, actually maybe even smaller for some of these rocks. It's not too bad. I know that Pebble 3 is super big, so actually let me just put a transform on it here and do it at this level. I can control click on here if I need to grab something that way, and then just make that half the size. Okay, so we're getting there. We're starting to add some nice little subtleties to our scene. So now that I've done that, so let's look at my scene graph with these instance points. So again, they're outside here. Outside, they're at the root level. So let's just, I want to put this in that same location. We'll say scene /env, and let's call this, we can call these pebbles. Okay. And so now in my environment, I have my pebbles that are being instanced. So the other thing I want to do, so just looking at these actually right now, you can see, well, I don't love what I'm getting out of it. I don't love, the colors are a little bit too drastically different. If they're supposed to be part of that ground, maybe I want them to blend in a little bit more. So I'm going to drop down and edit material node. And for each of these materials, I can grab, for each of these rocks, I can grab their materials. So there's 3 of them. Let's do 3. It just so happens they all have the same name, but that's quite all right. I do have different textures on them. And I'm going to load each one of these. So this edit material node is actually just like the material library. It's empty. But now once I hit load, it loads up a node graph of each material so that you can go in and make some edits on them. So what I want to do is there's a couple things to make note of. So you'll see that it came in with a material, principled shader, as well as a preview surface. And so the difference is that when we're looking at Karma, and why don't we do that right now? Let's look at Karma here. So when we're looking at Karma, we are seeing the principled shader. It's getting applied then. But when we are looking at just the GL view, or when we're in just Houdini GL, it uses it wants to use the USD preview surface. And that's actually why the collect node is in there. The delegate decides what it needs to use based on, whatever state it's in. And so like here, I'd say, okay, so now I'm looking at a render. So this is actually Karma render. I'm going to change some of these settings. So I have some render settings for the viewport. I just want to turn it down, turn off depth of field, even though there's no camera, so it's not really doing anything. I want to get a closer look at these rocks. And then what I want to do here is I want to change the base color. So let's grab that. And then I can also grab my pointer here and try. Let's just make sure this is working. Yep, there we go. So I can grab just some colors from the ground. And then what I want to do, I'm going to use these to tint them. So before I make too many adjustments, there's a couple things I can do. I'm just going to reference this channel in a few places. I can reference it. Let me go back out to DGL while I do this. I can reference this in the preview shader. So I can just say base relative reference. I want to do it for each rock. So I'm going to say base relative reference there. I'm going to do it here. Paste relative reference there. I'm going to do it here. Okay, so now we go back up to the sort of main one that I've been changing. So you see here, it's changing everything good. Obviously, I don't want them that color. Let me grab from here. Maybe something a little bit lighter, like maybe, yeah, just to kind of give the materials a little bit of a different tone to them. I don't want not quite as harsh. Okay, I mean that's good enough. I don't have to spend too much time massaging here. So I've done that. So I got my edit materials are all set. So now the next thing that I want to do is, now that I have my rocks, I'm going to add some trees. Okay, so for the trees, let me pop back out into OBJ land here. So if you look here, I have a tree. Let's just dive inside as free speed tree. And I've just done a few things to it. I've done a poly reduce and just fused it. And I'm just going to use just this one tree. But what's really nice is, let me go back. Actually, let's use the desktop. Let's go back to Solaris and into my stage. And so I'm going to use a SOP import node here. And drop that down. Let's look at just that for a moment. So let's grab that tree. So let's go up here, out tree, accept. So here's the tree. So you see it comes in, it's not ideal for what I want the way it comes in. It's just putting everything at the root. And even if I was to say, no, I want it to be a tree, and it doesn't do anything. Why is that? So, well, let's pop back to the tree geometry for a moment. If I look on my geometry spreadsheet on primitives, you'll see that there's a path. So our SOP import nodes are looking for, if there's a path attached to it, it's one of the things that it looks for in order to try and intelligently figure out how to build your scene graph inside of Solaris. So an easy fix for that, what I'm going to do for this is just drop down an attribute delete node, and I'm just going to remove that attribute. I don't need that. I'm not going to use that, at least for the purposes of this course today. So now when I look at my scene graph tree, it's coming in just as a SOP import. I'm going to call this tree. And then now what I'm going to do is drop down another point instancer, or instance to points. Feed that in, feed the tree in. Okay, so there we go. So now I could go in and paint things here. What I'm going to do instead actually is I'm going to turn off everything else just for some speed purposes. Actually, no, I'm not. What I'm going to do is, let's look from above. So I'm going to drop a grid down. And actually, just for speed, because I don't want it to start copying all these trees to all these points on this grid. So what I'm going to do, okay, so I'm going to hide everything else. And what I'm going to do here is, let me just use a LOP import node. And I want to bring in the tent. Up front, accept. And I'm just going to bring in, bring in the whole thing. Why not? Right, just bringing that in as a reference, basically. Okay, and I'm just going to show that like that. And then I'm going to take this grid, and what I want to do with the grid is I want to, I'm going to place the grid where basically around roughly where I want these trees to go. So I'm going to put something here, just kind of build somewhat of a path instead of painting, especially because these trees are sort of heavy. So I know I want a kind of a patch of trees here, almost like a garden or something. I'm losing my voice already. Do the same thing over here. Something like that. And we can merge them together. I'm just going to put a scatter on here. Don't need that many. Let's just do, I don't know, 15 trees. Let's kind of kill that relaxing a little bit. Okay. All right, that's not so bad. All right, that's good. So I got some trees on there. Let's go out here and see what the result is. So, okay, not too bad, kind of bushy. Maybe they're too close together. Maybe they're too tall. Let's go inside and I could spread them out a little bit. Let's do that. So let's just say this should go all the way over here. Yeah, these definitely should be much bigger as far as this geometry is concerned. Same with this one here. Much bigger. Oops. Okay. It's okay. These are just, I'm just kind of randomly placing these trees. I'm also going to put down an attribute randomize for the P scale. Yeah, so now that I've done that, we can do that. So you'll notice like I'm having some polygon issues, right? And I have all these trees that I'm trying to look at and it's slowing things down. So before I go any further, I want to fix that. So here's what I want to do. I know we've talked about the idea of proxy probably before. So first thing I need to do is I'm going to go back into my tree here. And right off the bottom here, I want to do a delete. Probably do a couple things here to speed this up. So let's just say I don't want the roots, right? We don't need those roots. So let's get rid of those. Good, cool. And then I also probably don't need some of the other, well, what I'm going to do is I want to get rid of the leaves and the twigs and just have the trunk here. And we're going to use that as a proxy, right? So I have my tree proxy. So let's go back into LOPs and I'm just going to alt drag to create this proxy node here, or what will eventually be our proxy node. Let's go out tree proxy. And so one of the first things that I need to do once I do that is that I want to make sure let's load this as a reference. I want to load them both as references, in fact, and I'll show you why in a moment. But let's load this as a reference. And then I want to say, okay, let's configure this primitive. And so what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to say, okay, taking this tree, actually call this, get to the names in a moment, but we want this to be proxy. So let's just make sure that we're doing this right. So our primitive path here, I want this to be /tree. And we'll call this proxy. And this primitive path here is actually just tree. And then now what I want to do is merge them together. So let's grab a sublayer node. Let's do this, sublayer inputs. So we see proxy is sitting under tree, and then underneath that I have my tree mesh. I am getting, of course, another one of those warnings, so we will configure that layer. Just drop down and configure layer here. And this save path will be assets. Let's go demo assets. We'll call this tree proxy. Okay, my error went away. So there's a couple things here I want to get rid of. Oh, I don't want that there. Let's just put that back to defaults. So now I get something that makes a little bit more sense. Same here. I don't want that. Let's just put this back to defaults. So now the last thing I need to do is now configure the main primitive. So what I'm doing here is I'm just saying, you know what, that low res version we made, whenever I'm in just Houdini GL, that's what I want to be seeing. And so I'm going to take this mesh here and say that is for render purpose. And then this proxy primitive is for proxy purpose. So already you'll see, so if I go into Karma, I'll get everything, but when I'm in GL, I just get those. And so that might help speed up my instancing a little bit, make things a little bit easier to manage. Okay. So now what I want to do here is say, all right, I want to do my last little thing. I want to take all of these layers and I'm going to configure this layer and I'm going to save these instances as a layer, right? And so let's get a little bit of lag there. Okay, so we notice that the layer is not quite what I want it to be because we see the instance to points is going on outside of the node that I want to be using. So before I do anything, let me go up here, back to my instance to points node. And let's go up here and say, let's put this in scene env. We'll make one trees. Now I forgot one other thing here. I almost forgot. We don't have any materials on this. So we need a material library. So let's drop that down. Now I'm going to go over here. I'm not going to make every material. So let me just dive inside a pre-existing thing here. Let's bring them over. I'm just going to copy them into here. I also want to get rid of, I don't want roots. We don't need roots for this. So I'm going to copy these roots down here, or copy these materials down here. You don't need roots. And then I have lots of materials now. So I'm going to say autofill materials. And because I like to keep things organized, I am going to say tree in front of all of these. This is a little bit of pain at the moment. So I want to assign this, but wait, that's one big fat mesh. Why is it one big fat mesh? Well, what I need to do is over here, is I want to go in and say, oh, let's import our subset groups. So if I click on this, let's see, it gives me all the groups from object space that I want to import so that I can use them to assign materials. So if you would normally use groups to assign materials, you do it this way. So immediately see in the scene graph tree, I'm getting all those subsets. So now back on my material, I can just grab that subset and use that to do all of the assigning. Excellent. So my twigs. so on and so forth. So there we go. And we'll just take a quick look. Karma, there my textures are coming in. Okay, that's looking pretty good. All right, so there's one last thing that maybe I think I'm going to do. I'm going to treat this. We're going to treat this as a, this is our layout. So this is going to be our sequence layout. So let's drop down a USD raw. Let's go like this. And then let's give this a name that I like better. Hip library demo layers. We'll call this sequence. Called sequence? Yeah, we'll call it sequence layout. USDA. Okay. And so now I should have everything set up nicely the way I want. You know what? There's some reflection on my ground plane before I go saving anything out. I don't like that. Whoops, wrong place. So I want to make sure that I get rid of some of that reflection here. Let's go in here. And let's turn that pretty much off. Okay. So now when I hit this render or save to disk for this, what it's going to do is it's going to save all those layers, all that stuff that I have created up to this point is going to get written out. So every one of those little layer paths or layer save paths that I've generated, that all gets written out now. So that's going to happen. So let's see here. Karma looks good. Go back to Houdini. And let's just zoom in there and see what I got. There's still some, that's not so bad. So we're just going to leave it there right now. Okay, so what I'm going to do, deselect that, and I'm going to hit save to disk. And it's going to write out all of my different layers. Now I got an error. I'm glad I got an error. Why did I get an error? So I got an error because the tree proxies are giving me an error up here. So let's go up here and check out what we got here. So I have no layer save path. That is the problem. So let's go in here. Let's go. Assets. Let's go tree.usd. Let's go in here and do the same thing. Assets, go tree proxy.usd. So now let's try that again. No errors. Okay, so now that we've written all that stuff out, let's take a look at what was written out. So I can go in, here's my sequence layout, which is what I wrote at the end. And if I say, let's open this with Sublime Text. So if you look here, you'll see it's bringing in the ENV layer, which is above that, as well as the market asset USD file, right? And if I look at that, well, we see what that's doing. That's looking at the two references, and then it adds my geometry ground plane. So you can see the different levels and how things work and how all of our references work. Even as we look at this, all the point instancing information, as well as the materials, the geometry. Here's the rock geometry that's being used for the prototypes. So all that stuff is all in here. That's why I saved it as USDA. Normally, you wouldn't necessarily do that if you don't want to. But it's handy if you want to sort of inspect what's there. So now we've got a little bit of time left, so let's move on. So the next bit that I want to do here is imagine that I am now, I'm the camera department. So I want to bring in the layout that we just created, and I want to just make some cameras from this. So I'm going to go in and grab my sequence layout. Let's lower that a little bit. Put a layer break after this so that I just save out the camera information only. And then I'm going to put down a camera. And let's look through the camera, lock it, the viewport, and then I can start moving around like that. Okay. I'm going to Alt drag over, do the same thing with camera 2. Just kind of do something a little bit different, maybe for camera 2. Maybe even, well, I don't want it to be that wide. Let's bring it back in, something like that. Okay, so I have a couple of cameras set up. Next thing I want to do is I'm going to put down a switch node. And we're going to use our context options editor, which is new to Houdini 18 and Solaris as well. And so what it allows me to do is I can create sort of, it's a weird little, allows me to do is I can create these menus. Basically, it's going to be an integer menu that I'm going to call shot. And then I can edit the labels in every way. Shot 01, shot 02. And then now I have this nice little drop-down menu that I can use to control what I'm looking at. And then if I just plug that variable into my switch, then I can control all of that from here, right? And so even to make that easy, what I can do is I can say, all right, well, why don't I just give these all the name shot cam? So I can say shot cam, and then maybe it's controlled by a variable somewhere else as well. It's not terrible. And then that way when I'm looking through here and I make these changes, I can do it that way. Now, that may not be ideal. I'm not going to do it that way. Let's just revert these to defaults. And we'll see when we get into lighting other ways that we can control this. But for now, we'll keep it like this. But I want to write out these cameras, these camera assets. So I'm going to go into PDG for that. So let me drop down to top network and create a wedge node. This is going to control the shot picker, which shot is being chosen. Call it shot picker. Make sure we're exporting if we need to. We want 2 wedges. We want it to be an integer. And then I want to put a USD output here. To make sure I'm pointing to that switch. And we don't need that necessarily. And then here, I just want to make sure, go to library, demo, cameras, and we'll call it camera underscore at wedge index. So it's going to use the wedge number as it wedges through these things. And I want to control the context options, so I can do that on the ROP itself. The context options I want to control is shot. It's a number, obviously, and that shot picker variable that we're creating with the wedge is what I'm going to be getting here. So, so now that I've done that, I should be good to go. Let's cook the output node. All right, let's go up here. Let's grab a sublayer node. Just to check everything. Here's my camera. Camera 0 or camera that, and the other one's camera 1. Let's do that. All right, so our cameras were written out perfectly. So I think I'm going to stop there, and Next up, we'll take a look at some of the other components that were created by some amazing artists to help flesh out our scene as if they were part of the effects department. So we'll get some moving trees and some other things that are really cool. And then I'll come back later and we'll do some sequence lighting and some shot lighting and multi-shot rendering. So hope you enjoy. Thanks.